What you feel, this compulsion that seems bigger than you, this need that dominates you, this emptiness that insists on returning, this is not madness. It is not failure. It is not a moral defect. This is pain, and all pain has an origin. Carl Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human soul, said that many vices are not just destructive habits, but desperate attempts to find something sacred. In one of his most famous letters written to the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he was direct. Addiction is a frustrated spiritual quest. It is the soul crying out for meaning, trying to touch the infinite and finding only alcohol, drugs, excess, chaos. Jung called this spiritus contraparatum, the true spirit at war with the false spirit. On the other side, Gab Mate, a doctor and psychiatrist who dedicated his life to understanding the root of human suffering, states, "The question is not why addiction. The question is why the pain." For him, addiction is not the problem. It is the solution someone found to cope with a trauma that still lives within. And if you take a moment to observe your own story honestly, you might realize this too, that what drives you to repeat the same behaviors, to sabotage yourself, to run away from yourself is not pleasure. It is anesthesia. This video is not a lesson. It is not a judgment. It is a mirror. Here we will look together at what you may have been avoiding for a long time. We will talk about what happens behind addiction, whether it is to drugs, alcohol, foods, work, shopping, or even constant distraction. Because deep down, all of this is just an attempt to fill the same void. Buddhism speaks of the realm of hungry ghosts, beings with small mouths and enormous stomachs starving for something that never arrives. Gabmate uses this metaphor to describe the addict, someone who feels an insatiable hunger for connection, for presence, for belonging, but who, not knowing where to find it, seeks relief in whatever is possible, even if that relief costs everything. Perhaps you're tired. Perhaps you're wondering if there is a way out. I'm not here to promise you an easy cure, but I guarantee you one thing. There is a path, and it begins when you understand that addiction is a symptom, not the disease. Pain is not the end. It is a calling. And if you have the courage to listen, you may discover that there is another life waiting on the other side. Understanding addiction is understanding yourself, and this can change everything. Addiction does not begin with the substance. It begins with pain. Before the first dose, the first escape, the first compulsive behavior, there was a body in suffering. There was a neglected heart. There was a scared, confused, lonely child who learned too early that the world was not a safe place. Hungarian-Canadian physician Gabor Mate spent decades living with people whom the world preferred to forget. Homeless individuals, chronic drug users, patients abandoned by the healthcare system and their own families. And what he discovered was this: all of them, without exception, carried a deep emotional wound. Many were abused, neglected, ignored, beaten, or simply deprived of love. And even those who did not experience severe traumas in the classical sense still lived experiences of emotional disconnection sufficient to shape their brains towards suffering. Addiction, according to Matt, is the attempt to alleviate that pain. He says the real question is never why addiction, but rather why the pain. And that question changes everything, because when you understand this, you stop seeing addictive behavior as a whim, as weakness, as a stupid choice, and you start to see it as a legitimate, albeit destructive, response to legitimate pain. The addicted brain is not a weak brain. It is a brain that has learned to protect itself. When you use a substance or dive into compulsive behavior, your body releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter of reward, pleasure, survival. It is the same system activated when we feel love, acceptance, connection. But for many, those experiences were absent or painful. So the brain learns to seek the same relief elsewhere: alcohol, cocaine, pornography, ultra-processed food, shopping, social media, gaming, status. Mate describes addicts as inhabitants of the kingdom of hungry ghosts, an image drawn from Buddhism. In this symbolic view, these creatures have small mouths, narrow throats, and enormous stomachs, hungry for something they can never digest. It is the perfect image of the addicted soul, always seeking, always consuming, but never filled. Because what is sought, in fact, is not the substance. It is the feeling of being whole. It is the attempt to anesthetize the silent scream of the inner child that was never heard. And perhaps you recognize yourself in this. Perhaps your compulsion is not for something that visibly destroys your life. Perhaps it is something more subtle, more disguised, more socially accepted. But the question still stands. What are you trying to avoid feeling? While the world continues to punish the behavior, the pain that fuels it continues to grow. That is why treatments based solely on abstinence fail so often, because they combat the symptom but ignore the cause. And as long as the wound is open, the mind will continue to seek relief no matter the cost. But what if what you are seeking out there in the substance, in excess, is actually within you? What if real relief does not come from anesthesia, but from reconnecting with your own soul? This is where Carl Jung comes in. For him, addiction is not just an attempt to escape pain. It is a misguided attempt to seek the sacred. For Carl Jung, addiction was never just a behavioral disorder, much less a matter of lack of willpower. He saw it as a deep symptom of spiritual disorientation, a cry of the soul in search of meaning, a desperate attempt to reconnect with the self, using tools that in the end only deepen the internal schism. Jung understood that human beings cannot bear to live disconnected from their own center. And when that connection is broken, whether by trauma, repression, social conditioning, or loss of identity, the psyche seeks a way to compensate. This compensation, when it does not find healthy or symbolic paths, manifests through destructive means: obsessions, compulsions, addictions. It is as if the individual, upon losing contact with their inner axis, begins to seek substitutes for the sacred, and many find this in alcohol, drugs, or any behavior that provokes an alteration of consciousness. This is what Jung realized when writing to Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. In this historic letter, Jung explains that for many, the desire for alcohol is in fact the unconscious desire for a mystical experience, for an expanded state of consciousness, for transcendence, spiritus contra spiritum, the true spirit in opposition to the false spirit, substance as a simulacrum of the divine. Think carefully. What does addiction offer if not a brief sense of relief, peace, or escape? The problem is not what the addict seeks, but where they are looking. Behind every compulsion lies a legitimate impulse of the soul, a desire to return to the center, to reconnect with the self. When this impulse cannot express itself due to trauma, fear, or repression, it escapes through destructive behaviors. Within you lies a hidden territory Jung called the shadow. It contains everything you were taught to hide or deny: anger, shame, fear, sadness, vulnerability, desire. Repressed, these parts don't disappear. They influence your thoughts and actions, often unconsciously. Addiction emerges as a symptom of this divided psyche, a way to manage unprocessed pain and suffocated emotions. Consider how often you repeat behaviors you swore to abandon, or sabotage yourself despite knowing the harm. This is not weakness. It is the shadow trying to emerge. Addiction acts as a pressure valve for pain you cannot face. Healing begins when you stop fighting the symptom and confront the root, the shadow you fear to touch. Recovery is not just stopping a behavior. It is descending into yourself, facing your pain, and integrating your shadow. It is recognizing the trauma, loneliness, and unmet needs that shaped you, often from childhood, and learning to soothe yourself without external escape. Addiction is an attempt at self-regulation, a misguided path to connection. True healing comes from connection, within yourself and with others. This journey requires courage. It is not quick or easy. It is a confrontation with your own fears, guilt, and shame. But by facing them, the shadow ceases to control you and becomes part of your strength. Recovery is a rebirth, a rebuilding of wholeness, a return to inhabiting your life fully. You are not your addiction. You are awareness learning to choose differently. Healing is not perfection. It is integration, presence, and the courage to feel without fleeing.